Hey there, it's Darcy Clark with you today. Thanks for joining me. Today's practice is a fairly short practice that's going to be done on the mat. The focus for today's practice is strengthening the thighs and the glutes in bridge pose and different bridge variations. And then we're going to give some stretch into some more active stretch instead of like a passive stretch into the hamstrings and into the glute muscles afterwards. Okay, so let's begin on the back in kind of bridge prep, I call it. So you've got your knees bent and your feet on the mat about hip distance apart. So you don't want them shoulder distance apart, you want them a little narrower than you think, more in line with the hip bones. And then try to lift and slide your shoulder blades down your back. Take your arms straight along your sides. So you might be familiar with bridge, lifting quite high so that you come like right up onto the tops of your shoulder blades. But for this purpose today, we're going to keep the bridge fairly low. So rather than lifting really high, we're going to keep pretty much the upper back, the backs of the upper ribs on the floor. So the shoulder blades are going to really stay on the ground. Okay, so first, just feel your feet. Maybe lift your toes, spread your toes. Feel a kind of lift through the arches of your feet so that as you spread your toes, you can feel the pads of your feet in the floor from the big toes across to the baby toes. So feel the pads of your feet wide into the mat, and then also feel the inner edge of each heel in the mat and the outer edge of each heel on the mat. So the four corners of each foot is planted in the ground. And then rest and relax your toes to the floor. And then as you press down into your feet, you really keep that support even through all four corners of your feet, and you lift your hips. So once you're up, bring your thumbs to your glutes. And sometimes when we're here and we overuse the glutes, let's actually do that just to feel what it's like. So clench your buttocks and really push your hips up as high as they can go, you know, like you're wanting to thrust your pubic bone towards the ceiling. And you can feel your glutes really engaged here, but you can't actually feel the hamstrings engaged much. So bring the fingers to the backs of your thighs, and you'll notice that they're pretty soft. They're not really engaged. And what's happened is your feet, or the weight in your feet has likely gone more to the outer edges of your feet, and your knees have splayed apart. So rather than using just the glutes, we're going to try to engage the glutes and the hamstrings and the inner thighs together. So to do that, you keep the support through all four corners of each foot. So you press more into those inner edges of the feet, the big toes and the inner heels. And you feel like your knees move straight forward, your thighs move straight forward. So now you're engaging more through this whole chain of muscle in the leg and the thigh, through the inner thighs, up through the hamstrings, up into the glutes. So the glutes are still engaged along with the thigh muscles. So on your inhale, let's lower back down. And then on the exhale, press again into your feet. Feel your knees move forward as you're raising your hips. So each inhale, you lower down, hips to the floor. Each exhale, you find the feet, press into all four corners of the feet and raise through the hips. Okay, so as you feel and keep each foot planted into the mat, you're going to find the connection that your inner thighs and your hamstrings have with your glute muscles. So all of those muscles are engaging to help raise your hips. Thighs stay parallel. Each time your hips lift, it's as though your knees are moving forward. You can feel that. Knees are moving forward. Your thighs are moving forward with your knees. And then each time you lower down, you're just relaxing a little bit more around the glutes and around the thighs. Engaging as you lift And after a certain point, getting closer to the floor, you can feel those muscles begin to relax. Okay, so find that movement for a couple more breaths, moving slowly and deliberately so you can feel what you're doing, feel whether you're losing that connection through the balls of the big toes or through the inner heels, trying to engage the glutes and the hamstrings and the inner thighs together. And then the next time you raise your hips up, let's hold that. Hold that bridge, and again, don't worry about lifting super high, okay? So it's maybe a lower bridge than you're used to, okay? So then, as you try your best to keep your pelvis in the center, nice and balanced, nice and still as best you can, raise your right foot so the knee just comes above the hip, and then lower the foot. As you stand into your right foot, lift the left foot. So we're just going to keep the knees bent and continue this kind of slow march. So I've actually placed my hands on my pelvis, on those pelvic bones, so you can feel, I can feel whether I'm dipping into one side or not, or whether my pelvis is shifting around. And I'm trying to find a bit of strength around the center, around my core, but also I'm feeling the strength in the standing leg, in the leg of the foot that's on the floor that's supporting me to lift the other leg. So go for a couple more on each side, moving nice and slowly again, keeping that knee bent as it raises. That's it. Feeling the engagement of each leg. And then let's lift the right leg and see if you can just stay up in this bridge. Don't worry about how high you're up. So if you're just an inch or so off the ground, that's perfectly fine. What matters is you feel and keep your left foot engaged through the ball of the big toe, through that inner heel. So you're not letting that left knee move out to the side. That's it. And then see if you can just stretch up for a moment through this right foot, and now push into this left foot a little bit further to lift the right foot up a little higher. Just one more breath here. That's it. And then lower that right foot to the floor. Take a breath here, or lower all the way to the ground to find your breath again. Do what you need to do. And then you come up again into that little bridge, and you press into the right foot now. So feel the big toe pressing into the floor. Feel that inner knee still in line with the kind of inner hip, so the knee points straight ahead when you raise your left foot. Left foot lifts, keeping the strength through the right foot, and then you stretch up through your left heel. And maybe you feel like that left heel can touch a little higher towards the ceiling as you feel another full breath here. It's a good challenge. And then lower the foot to the floor and be here for one breath. Maybe lift a little higher now, keeping the breath moving slow. And then try to roll down the spine. So let's roll the spine down from the top to the bottom, one vertebra at a time, just rolling it out in the spine. Once you're down, take your arms away from your sides and just keeping the shoulders relaxed, go for a few pelvic tilt movements so that you end up massaging a little bit into the back, the lower back. That's it, letting the pelvis tilt forward, feeling your lower back or the back of your waist arch away from the ground. And then on the exhale, you press the lower back more towards the floor, flattening the lower back. Okay, and then try to find a neutral pelvis, all right, where you're neither pressing your lower back into the mat, nor are you arching it way off the floor. So find that little happy medium space where you have a little bit of space, ideally, between the back of your waist and the floor. So you can even bring one of your hands underneath that space. And you don't want to be arched way up like this with the tailbone down and the lower ribs thrusted up. Nor do you want the back of the waist pushing into your hand, okay? So you can just, even do the pelvic tilt with your hand there to feel and sense both positions. And then find that neutral position where you have a little bit of give, a little bit of space between the floor and the back of the waist, okay? But the lower ribs stay sinking in, okay? So that's important to keep the lower ribs resting in towards the spine while you keep that little bit of space in the back of the waist. So from here, we're going to keep the left foot where it is and bring the right knee in and stretch up through the right leg. So it's like what we were doing just a minute ago, except we're not up in bridge. So it's a lot easier in many ways. However, we're still using some strength to keep this leg up. So this quad is working a little bit. You might feel some tension into this front hip flexor. So just keep it comfortable, keep the knee as bent as you need it to be to stay here for a bit. Okay, and if you're quite flexible or strong and can straighten the leg, just try not to lock it. So keep a little bit of a bend in the knee no matter what. And then point the toes, flex the foot, and just do that a few times. So we end up finding the mobility of our ankles, and you might also feel some stretch coming into your calves. So we're stretching and strengthening the calf and the shin muscles here while we point and flex the foot. Find that full range of motion. And then keep the stretch up through the heel, so dorsiflexion through the foot. And then we're going to try to find some movement just in this hip joint. So rather than moving the whole pelvis, we're going to move at the hip joint, forward and back. So on the inhale, moving the foot away from you. On the exhale, moving the leg closer to you. And you're finding this movement with your own strength. And you're finding this movement purely at the hip joint rather than allowing the pelvis and the spine to move. So I'm going to show you what it'll look like if you start moving through the pelvis. What I'm doing is tilting my pelvis back and flattening my lower back into the mat in order to bring my leg this close towards me. And then I'm moving my pelvis to swing my leg this way. And instead of doing that, you want to try to keep that little bit of space between the back of the waist and the floor and find the limit of movement through your hip joint. That's it. So the pelvis stays still. Okay. And then while we try to still keep the pelvis fairly still, you might even bring your hands to your hip bones, your pelvic bones there. Try to cross your right ankle over your left knee. And notice if the whole pelvis wants to shift. What will likely happen is that right hip will dip lower towards the front of the mat, away from your head, and you're going to bring more weight likely over into that right buttock. Okay? So try to keep your pelvis in the center. Try to keep the weight over into that left buttock a little more. And then hug your left knee in towards you. So bring that left foot off the floor. So you might want a belt or hold on with your hands behind your left thigh. And then as you're here, just try your best to notice if the weight has shifted over to one side again. See if you can keep that left knee tracking in line with your left hip. So that as you breathe in again, you're moving at the hips to bring the legs a bit away from you. You don't have to use the hands. If you can just have the hands on the hip bones, the pelvic bones, and on the exhale, you're finding a deeper fold, a deeper bend at your hips again to bring the knees in. So breathing in and breathing out. So this requires a bit of strength here in the belly. And if you notice that you just end up firing up way too much in this left hip flexor, if there's like a guy wire right here at the front of your left hip, feel free to just hold on with your hands and allow that left hip to relax a little more with the support of your hands. Okay? Either way, trying again to find the movement not in the spine. So if I move the spine, if I let my lower back flatten into the floor, and if I let my bum lift away from the ground, I'm going to be able to bring my legs in a lot closer, but I'm no longer really in my hips. Okay? So if I keep my spine more neutral, I'm all in the hips, finding and keeping some strength and stability in my pelvis as I stretch the outer right hip. All right, and then let it go. Bring the feet to the floor, give the legs a little bit of a shake. Then we'll take it to the other side, okay? So start with the hands on the pelvis, shift around, shimmy around the pelvis, try to find it neutral in the center. So one hip isn't any higher up towards the head than the other, and one hip isn't any higher up away from the floor than the other. So sometimes it's helpful just to actually do that movement first, and then find center. Okay, so let's keep the right foot on the ground, left foot up, stretching up through the left heel, stretching into the back of that left leg. We're stretching the hamstrings, we're stretching the calf with some internal strength to keep the leg up. So point and flex the foot, finding the limits of movement, your own mobility in your ankle joint, also in your calf muscle, how much length you've got in the muscle, how much can the heel lift, how much can the toes spread towards you. And then keep the heel lifted, spread the toes back towards you, and we'll find this movement in the hip joint again. So trying your best not to let the pelvis move, not to let the lower back, the back of your waist, flatten into the floor, so that you end up finding the movement purely from your left hip joint. And you're finding this movement with your own internal strength rather than using your arms to pull the leg in. All right? So we're stretching the hamstrings, but we're also finding and keeping a bit of strength in the body to find that stretch. And then bring the hands back to the hips, the pelvic bones there, so that you can cross your left ankle over the right knee this time. And just notice if the whole pelvis has shifted as you've done that. And try to keep the weight over into that right buttock a little more. If all the weight's shifted into the left side, bring it back to center. So we're trying to feel the pelvis stay in the center, so that you might even just take your thumbs into the hip creases there, so that when you bend the knees, when you bring that right knee in towards you, when you bring your right foot off the floor, you're finding the movement at the hip joint rather than moving through the pelvis, okay? So rather than moving the pelvis in a backwards tilt or a posterior tilt, rather than lifting my tailbone up, rather than flattening my lower back into the mat, I'm trying to maintain that little bit of space in my low back as I draw the knees in. So I end up feeling it a little more into the hips, and I'm not pushing or forcing my way in any further. Feel free to take the hands behind that right thigh. And so, as you breathe in, you can ease away from the stretch a little bit. And as you exhale, you can draw the stretch in a little deeper without losing that stability and balance in the pelvis. Notice how the shoulders might want to unnecessarily get involved. If If you find that holding on behind your thigh ends up lifting your chin and shrugging your shoulders up like this, because you have to kind of struggle to hold on, use a belt instead. So bring a belt or even just like a scarf or something around the back of your right thigh, and you can hold on to the ends of the belt, and so you can relax more into the neck and into the shoulders. So you don't have to strain into those muscles. So a couple more breaths here. And then let it go. Release both feet to the floor. And we'll just end with a nice stretch movement into the hips. So we're going to take the feet nice and wide, like mat width apart, maybe even slightly wider. Rest the arms away from your sides. So let the knees fall to the right. Right knee out to the right, left knee draws in and down. And just pause there for a couple of breaths. Your left hip will lift a bit, that's okay. So this time we're allowing the pelvis to move, and we're keeping that left shoulder on the floor though. So this helps you might feel some stretch coming into the front of that left hip. This will feel good if you felt those hip flexor muscles holding on during those last two stretch exercises. So breathe into where you notice the stretch here, where you notice an opening. And then come back to center. Keep the feet wide and let the knees fall to the left. You want to keep this right shoulder relaxed on the floor. Your knees may not go quite down as far, that's fine. You just take them over as far as you comfortably can go, while allowing that right hip to lift a little bit off the floor. So we've actually found a little bit of a twist here in the back, but the emphasis is on this opening and stretch you might find in your right thigh or in your right hip area, maybe even up into the right side of the waist. You might feel that stretch up into the hip flexor. So notice where you feel it and breathe into that. Okay, and then come back up to center. Hug your knees into your chest. All right, and come on over to your side. Come on up to sitting. All right, well, thanks a lot for joining me today. I hope that you were able to feel how that connection of the thigh muscles and the glutes working together. And we'll explore that a little more in some upcoming videos, standing practice, belly practice, as well as seated and squat. All right, so stay tuned. And let me know if you have any comments or questions, and I'm happy to answer them as best I can. All right, see you until next time. Namaste.